to MovieNaut, where we will discuss cult classic movies from various genres and decades. Stay tuned for this episode. All right, we're back for episode 7. We're going to be talking about favorite cult vampire movies, and I got Bill and Gary again. And Bill's going to start off the show.
Okay, so I thought I'd start off with one of the most obvious ones, the one that started all the Universal horror movies, Dracula from 1931. I love this movie. It has one of the most perfect Draculas of all time, in my opinion, Bela Lugosi. He gets the role because he's from pretty close to the same area where Dracula was supposed to be from. Played him on stage, both in Hungary and over here in the States. By the time he did this role, he could barely speak English. He was really still learning English. He did his lines phonetically. But not only Bela Lugosi has the most perfect Dracula, it also has one of the most perfect Renfields with Dwight Fry. That laugh. And then it even has one of the most perfect Van Helsings, because he's got that Dutch accent, or at least can do the Dutch accent anyway.
Right.
I think it's just a great combination. I think it's great all the way around. Maybe it's just barely cult, but I don't know. It's old enough. 1931. It's a little creaky. The second act gets a little slower, but overall, it's still an excellent movie. And I saw the play version of it about 2 years ago. That was for me, that was like a bucket list event for me, because I've been wanting to see that play forever. Little theater in Virginia Beach, I saw that, which was small production, but it was still cool. It was perfect. It was great. So that's what I wanted to start off with.
That movie has one of my favorite lines in it, and it's all about the delivery. I never drink wine.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's just perfect.
It is, and that is from the novel. I'll be talking about the novel later on as well. And the rat speech that Dwight Fry does, he delivers it perfectly. I think the best delivery of that speech is his, rats, thousands, millions of them.
And I have to say, Dwight Fry is a weird little tangent, but Ballad of Dwight Fry is my all-time favorite Alice Cooper song. So
definitely one of my favorites, at least. I love that one. And there's a YouTube version of it that actually has scenes from Dwight Fry movies. He's all throughout it and everything. It's
nice.
Great.
Because I know that they had him in mind. They changed the spelling of the name and stuff for it, but they had him in mind when they wrote that.
Yeah, that was definitely an homage to Dwight Fry. He's one of my favorite character actors of all time. Actually, I hunt him down into some of the old Poverty Row movies that he did. Also, a tragic figure. He dies at like 45 because he was working at a factory, and he was actually filming movies during the night and not even sleeping to get up and go back to work at the factory. Basically, just worked himself to death early on.
Yeah, he was a pretty special guy. That's the funny thing about some of those early Hollywood things, is it's like they had a lot of the sort of work ethic that a lot of the indie filmmakers have now, where they work day jobs and they go to do that. You don't see a lot of that in Hollywood anymore today.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, you had to have day jobs. He was underappreciated. He should have been, making more money by that time, but he wasn't.
Well, like Bela was greatly underappreciated, and
absolutely
he wasn't making the money he should have been making.
Yeah,
and it really, I think it could be argued it cost him his life. We've talked about that in some previous ones, but
oh yeah. Also, too, I don't. How was Dracula in the box office? Because I have a feeling it didn't do that well, and it's done well.
No, it did pretty well in its first run. They were about to go bankrupt, and Universal Studios was about to go bankrupt, and Dracula was the one that saved the studio. Was one of the first of several horror movies that wound up saving the studio.
That's
Oh,
kind
wow.
of a funny movie too, because parts of it you can literally watch it and see it as like, okay, this was a stage play, and they literally just grabbed the stage play and pulled it over into the film, you know.
As I
Uh,
said, I saw the stage play. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
yeah, and and the weird thing about movies in those days is they would, we didn't have the video capabilities that we have now. And
Right.
so in those days, a movie would be at the theater for a period of time and then it would go away. And then with movies like that one, I think they did it with the original Frankenstein. They did it with quite a few movies, Wizard of Oz, even. And then, like a year or two later, they would bring it back to the theaters and it would run again. And they would do that. And I know they did that with Dracula several times.
They did. In fact, that was in fact, you just reminded me that it saved the studio twice, because in its first release in 1931, and then it kind of went away for a while, and they Universal didn't do very many horror movies for a couple of years, and then in 1939 they did a double bill with Dracula and Frankenstein, and it did so well. That's how we got all those 40s horror movies with Universal, and it saved the studio twice.
Wow.
Gotta love horror saving the studio.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
That's how they got to be known as the horror studio, and Warner Brothers got to be known as the gangster studio, and MGM was the musicals, and they kind of had their own forte, and they kind of branched out into each other's forte, but there was
Yeah,
still one studio that mostly did this, and another studio mostly did that.
Yeah, and they also did a Spanish version of the Dracula.
that was shot at the same time on the same sets, but just at nighttime.
Right in the
Yeah.
middle of the night, they would film that, and then in the daytime, they were filming the Bela Lugosi one, and that one's pretty good too. I have seen that one a few times. They're both good, but I just love the Bela Lugosi. I just my favorite actor.
I'm really glad you went with that one because other than Nosferatu, it is literally the first vampire movie.
Pretty
Right.
much, yeah. And I like Nosferatu too, but I had to, gotta pick and choose a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. And Nosferatu, you can't find as well preserved copies of that anymore.
Fair enough. Yeah, it was a lost film for many years.
Yeah.
It was because the Stoker family ordered all copies destroyed because they didn't follow any copyrights to make it. They didn't
Right.
really have the copyright, so that's why they changed the name to Nosferatu, and they changed all the characters' names,
Right.
Jonathan Harker and all
But I
that.
think if I remember right, there are actually a couple title cards in there where you can see where the original titles were. I
Would be
think.
a bit surprised.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess it's my turn, and I'm gonna have to consult some stuff on this one because I've only seen this movie once, and I saw it like a few months ago, and I thought it was an amazing film. I mean, some of my favorite vampire films I've already talked about, so I won't be doing those anymore. But Modern Vampire, um, it was a movie from 1998. And it's from Richard Elfman, who is, of course, Danny Elfman's brother. And it's more of a comedy than anything else. It's definitely a comedy, but it's a lot of it takes place in this club where all these vampires hang out, and Dracula is like sort of the head, like gangster, basically, of the vampires. And there's a guy who's come into town who's another vampire who was basically ordered the hell out of everything because he pissed off Dracula. And he's come back into town, and it's very much it's like a mob movie, but it's also sort of a hipster film, and yet it's a vampire movie. And it's just a lot of fun. It starts off really like bizarre, like you're like, what the heck is going on here? And then after a while you come to realize that everybody's vampires, and there's a newly turned vampire that's sort of one of the main characters, and it's sort of her introduction into things, and it's just a lot of fun. I mean, it is definitely more comedy than horror, but there's plenty of horror too, and it's just a really fun bizarre movie.
That was Modern Vampire.
Yes.
That sounds really good.
Vampires.
My wife is here. She told me to write that down.
Yes, that is such a fun movie. I mean, it's got, it's got all the classic nudity and gore trappings that you would expect, but it's so much fun. I didn't know what to expect. I remember we had a free weekend of HBO or something, and I TiVoed it, and we sat back and watched it. And probably the first 20 minutes, we were like, "What in the world is going on here?" And then it was like, "Oh my god, this movie is great."
Sounds good. And I'll be hitting comedy twice a little later here, so don't feel too bad about the comedy.
So yeah, that's my first choice.
All right. Well, my first choice is from 1972, and it's called Grave of the Vampire. This has Michael Pataki and William Smith in it. And up until that point, this was possibly the most brutal vampire movie I've ever seen, because it starts off first with an implied rape scene, and then the vampire not just kills the boyfriend, but he picks him up and breaks him right on top of a gravestone. And he it's like the rules of vampires were like almost like thrown out, because he was just this really brutal type of a vampire. And then later on, the mother gave birth, and the baby's not drinking the mother's milk until she cuts herself, and he starts taking the blood. And later, then it fast forwards to I guess the time when the head vampire, he was in like a teacher, a professor, and turned out one of his students actually is his offspring, and he doesn't know it yet. And then the vampire invites him over to the class over to his house, and he starts killing the people off one by one until the son basically exposed him and everything, and saying, I know who you are, just goes into that whole thing. And then he proceeds to kill the vampire. I mean, with chains and a nice obvious stake through the heart. And then he starts going through a weird transformation. And his girlfriend was trying to find, what's going on? And he's telling her, get away. And then his voice kind of crackles like, get away, and all of a sudden he's walking down the steps, and it has the most weirdest placed fangs. Usually the fangs are right here. His were right in the center. And he's just walking down, and he's like, I'm not sure if William Smith was more of a character actor, did a lot of B movies, action, horror and stuff like that. And he's just this big guy, and all of a sudden he's just coming down the steps like that. And then he has a little bit of like a cross-eyed look to it, just I guess for effect or something. But this is one that I saw on late night TV. Scared the crap out of me the first time I saw it. It was like in the late 70s, so I was 13 years old, and it was a pretty brutal movie. If you want to see something like that, I mean, for the time, I think this would probably be rated R. Back then, I think it was like PG or something like that.
It amazes me what they used to make PG and R and even G back then when they first started the rating system.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's but yeah, this is a pretty. pretty brutal one. That's why I kind of wanted to lead off on.
And I know everybody on the panel knows, but just in case anyone watching doesn't, Will Smith is not the same as William Smith that's in that movie. Those
Right.
are definitely two different people.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's really weird. When I was working at this drugstore in the early 2000s, the actor William Smith, he came in, and boy, time was not on his side. I mean, he did not look well at all, and he was always he used the pharmacy there, and it's like, but that was kind of weird just to see him there. I'm like going, you look awfully familiar, and then I said, were you in that movie Grave of the Vampire? And he goes, oh my God. He says, hardly anybody asked me that. He says, so
Wow.
that was kind of cool, you know.
That is pretty cool.
So that is my first choice.
Okay. That is a good one. All right, so my second choice, I did the first of the Universal Monsters series. My second choice is the last of the Universal Monsters series, House of Dracula. And by this time, they were pairing up the monsters. You got the Frankenstein monster in there, and the Wolfman is also in there. Frankenstein monster does almost nothing but lay on a slab for 90% of the movie and comes to life right at the end. And then they even use stock footage by that time for his romp. But the Dracula story part of that movie is interesting, and I think it's one of my favorites, and that's why I really wanted to add it. It's actually one of my top favorite movies of all time. I wouldn't say it's one of the best movies of all time. It's one of my favorites. Very distinction there. But you have a doctor who meets up with the Wolfman. He's trying to cure him. He discovers the Frankenstein monster. Meanwhile, Dracula comes in, played by John Carradine by this time, and he says he's looking for a cure, but actually he's trying to get with one of the nurses instead. So he tries to cure Dracula, and he does a blood transfusion, and Dracula puts the doctor under hypnosis, and he reverses the blood transfusion so he gets some of Dracula's blood. And then the doctor becomes a bad doctor, is going around with his own rampage. And it was interesting because they also he had like this blood condition where they looked at it under a microscope. They looked at the vampire kind of scientifically for the first time that I know of.
Right.
I don't even know if it's been done since. I'm sure somebody must have done a little something with it scientifically since. But so anyway, I think that's a very underrated. Personally, and me and our friend Mike Korn go back and forth about this sometimes. I prefer it to House of Frankenstein, but I still like House of Frankenstein as well. But to me, House of Dracula is just a little bit better, in my opinion. A little bit more even with the monsters spread out through the whole movie. So that was my second one anyway. 1945, House of Dracula, the last of the Universal Monsters series.
Of the original Universal Monsters series.
Right. Yeah, of the original series there.
Yeah.
And they bulldozed the lot shortly after that too. I used to have a newspaper clipping when I was in college. They used to have the microfilm instead of the online stuff now. And I found a newspaper clipping of when they bulldozed the lot, but I seem to have misplaced that clipping, and I would love to get that back.
I'm sure you probably can find it online. Someone probably.
I suppose.
Okay, so for my second one, I'm going to go with kind of a bizarre one. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the movie, which everybody's familiar with the TV series. But the movie was an absolute, it's very much a comedy, but it's also an action movie, and it's certainly not a horror movie. I didn't really think it was horrific at all, but for my money, the death scene of Paul Rubens' character was the absolute best, most ridiculous death scene of all time, because he keeps falling down dead, coming back up, falling down dead for like 5-10 minutes. It's amazing. And the whole movie, I mean, obviously people liked it because they made a TV series out of it. And the whole flavor of the movie was a lot different than the TV series. The TV
Oh, yeah.
series was a lot more serious than the movie was. The movie was obviously a comedy, and it's just a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, I remember first seeing that one. That was a fun movie.
Yeah, it's a fun movie. It's not frightening, really. It's not great vampire lore, but it's just a lot of fun.
And
Created
having
its own,
Donald Sutherland in it, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah,
created its own folklore unto itself at this point. It's really ballooned into something, that a
yeah.
lot of people appreciate. It's a good one.
All right. My second choice is one that was made for TV, Salem's Lot. I didn't see this originally when it was on television the first time. I think a few years later when um, on, I saw it on VHS, and I would have loved to have seen it on TV because it was just that spectacular of a movie, and the vampire he's kind of fashioned off of Nosferatu more than any other vampire, and they even made recently on, I think it's on the MGM Plus, they have a miniseries where it's called Jerusalem Lot, and it kind of goes back into the history of Salem's Lot and how the area is basically has been cursed since back then, and it's been basically the home to vampires all those years, and then all of a sudden, I guess it must have been dormant for many decades, and then this vampire comes back in. Then of course they did the Return to Salem's Lot, which was more comedy and a little on the ridiculous side. I mean, I only watched that maybe once or twice, and I think for me personally that was enough. But this one I watched, I lost count. It's like,
Yeah,
and when it came out on Blu-ray, I was like going, "Oh, fantastic!" Because I did have it on DVD for a while, and then when it came out on Blu-ray, unfortunately, it's like bare, it's got no extra stuff to it, which is kind of sad. We kind of need to have behind the scenes kind of things and interviews, and unfortunately, I think recently David Soul passed away, and I think the young guy Lance Kerwin, he passed away as well. So they missed their opportunities right there. The only other person they could interview really is Stephen King. I don't recall what he thought of that adaptation because I know they also did a miniseries with Rob Lowe. And I didn't like that as much. I don't know. It just, there's certain movies you gotta leave them be because this one has an atmosphere that the remake really didn't have.
actually, I think I could be wrong, but I remember that when they originally put Salem's Lot on TV, it was actually a mini series, and then they
Yeah.
edited it into movie length. I think it's much better in movie length, but they've also recently done a remake, which Stephen King really liked, but it hasn't been released, and I don't know why it was on the schedule to be released and then never got released.
Probably the studio.
Yeah, the studio's having, I don't know if test audiences aren't liking it or what's going on, but there is a remake. And I will say that book is, in my opinion, one of his best books. The book is far better than the movie or mini series that came out in the 70s. But But yeah, I remember watching the miniseries when it first came out on TV. As like 2 nights, I think it went across.
Right.
It was really good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I heard, that it was like, two-hour movies, and then when I think they kind of cut some things out to make it a 2-hour movie or something like that. I think
Wait,
that's how.
I think it was better having stuff cut out of it because I think it's a little bloated as a miniseries. I
Right.
have the series on DVD, and I think it's a little too long, and there's some really slow parts. Um, but yeah, that one almost made my list. It was very close to making my list. So
And then that one scene where that boy just floating, and
oh yeah,
that was super creepy. I was always, when I first saw that, I was like going, there better not be anybody at my window doing that shit. Because
and that's a meme on Facebook all the time too.
yeah, it's like, geez. I mean, and then of course, the vampires with their, hypnosis, they tell them, open the door, open up the
Yeah,
window, let me in. And it's like,
yeah.
my answer is, no. Sorry.
Not happening.
No.
Not tonight, bro.
So that's my number two.
Okay, so I'm up again.
It's fun.
So my number three, and I go chronologically, is a European movie, and I was trying to work Christopher Lee in here, and it was tough to choose between this or one of his Hammer movies, but I went with Count Dracula, which I had read many times. It was a European movie directed by Jess Franco of all people, the European Ed Wood, sometimes he's referred to as. It's one of his better movies. And Christopher Lee does come in to play Dracula. So I went with Count Dracula is the title. I did finally get around to watching it. It is very close to the novel, probably the most accurate adaptation. But then I was reading a review of it because, I'd read about this movie so long. I was reading a review of it, and somebody made the comment that it's probably the most accurate adaptation because Jess Franco didn't have the imagination to do anything else with the story. It's one of those backhanded compliments, that sounds like you're
Right.
complimenting somebody, but really it's an insult. But really, it's
And plus, and plus he looked with the mustache, kind of looked more Eastern European.
he does actually, and Dracula in the novel does have a mustache in much of it.
Yeah.
They do describe him as having a mustache. So
I have
uh,
been meaning to watch that movie.
yeah, it's I think it's still on Tubi. That's where I caught it. But I believe it's still on there. It's really good. And Salem Lot, by the way, is on there too. But I think it's the 2-part miniseries version. Last I checked. But yeah, I mean, I watched it. It's a little slow here and there, but as far as Jess Franco goes, it's one of his better things. And I haven't seen a lot of Jess Franco, but I've seen my share. One of the better ones that I've seen from him. But anyway, so that's my second one, Count Dracula from 1970s. Christopher Lee playing Dracula in one of the most accurate adaptations ever made. Probably is more accurate than the 90s version, Bram Stoker's Dracula, as far as depicting the novel, at least. Which I love that movie too, actually. But as far as depicting the novel, this one actually might be a little closer than that even.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been meaning to pick that up, because I kind of like Christopher Lee as a vampire. I mean, he does it so well.
He does. He really does. And I
mean,
don't know.
because he towers over everybody else, so it's like,
Yeah, the guy's over
he has
6
that
feet.
menacing factor going on. So it's
He
like,
does.
I mean, what's more menacing? If you have a six, I think he's over 6 feet, or
He's over
having like
6
maybe,
feet. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, but he's over 6 feet.
or just having an average height, someone of maybe 5'6". It's like, I can't reach your neck.
Right?
Let me get out a step ladder or something like that. But yeah, that. Thanks for reminding me about that one. I definitely got to pick that one up.
Yeah, it's I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good, pretty well done.
Yeah, that I haven't seen that one, but I have to check that one out. That sounds good.
The other good one, I don't know if anybody picked it or not. Dan Curtis did one with Jack Palance or
Jack Palance,
Palance.
yeah.
Yeah,
I have seen
that
that one.
that was
pretty
that was
too.
good. That was a pretty good one. And him as Dracula, it's like Jesus,
And I believe
it
it's
was
made
like,
for TV originally.
yeah, and it's like it's almost like Dracula via Shakespeare. But yeah,
Okay, so my next one is a movie that came out via Cleopatra, which is a record label, but they also do movies recently, called The Taste of Blood. And it's really a slow burn movie. But one of the things I like about it, vampire geek that I am, I've done several collections of vampire stories and I've researched a lot of legends and stuff. And one of the Eastern European legends is the Vertilac. And the Vertilac is very different from the Count Dracula sort of vampire. Different ways to kill it. And it tends to feast on its family members. It comes back and just sort of relies on family ties to get in and get close and kill. And this movie is based on that legend, not the Dracula sort of legend that you are used to. And I love the fact that it's very mysterious because they have they think there's a Vertilac following them or going after them. And so the father goes out at night hunting it. And he comes back and they're not sure if he's a vampire or not. And they lock him up in a room and he talks to them and tries to convince him that he's not and to let it go. And you're really not sure if he is or isn't. And there's a certain tension about not knowing whether this guy is some killer or not. And there is very clearly early on a Vertilac who is a member of the family, but you're not sure if the father's been infected or not. And that whole paranoia, it kind of goes back to the invasion of the body snatchers. It's like, is it my family member or is it this creature who wants to kill us all? And I like that sort of tension and that sort of, I don't know, mystery about it. I think it's very effective. Again, it's a very slow burn movie, and some of it's not even in English. Some of it's captioned, some of it's in English, and it's a very indie movie, but it's also very cool.
That sounds really good.
It's actually, just to clarify, let me just get the exact title. It is actually called A.K. Tolstoy's A Taste of Blood, because there are several movies called A Taste of Blood, and if you
Okay.
go for the wrong one,
Right.
right.
A.K. Tolstoy's A Taste of Blood is the actual title.
Cool. That sounds cool. All right. My next one goes back to the 60s, and it's Planet of the Vampires. This one, just reading up on it, this one was a big influence on Ridley Scott for Alien and Prometheus. Obviously, you switch out Alien, an alien as opposed to vampires, but this rocket ship goes to this basically planet of vampires, and it's done by Mario Bava, and the color on this is amazing. It's so vibrant. I think this is probably one of those films that maybe influenced Dario Argento with his color schemes. And I first watched this on YouTube about 10 years ago, and when I had to get it on Blu-ray because I was just I just loved it. And I like the title track. I mean, the title, it says 10,000 years ago or 10,000 years to come. You know, it's like you don't know whether it's a past or the future going on here, but I mean, it's pretty cool. I mean, I like the artwork. You know, these little vampires. They don't look like that. I'm sure if it was made today, my green screen died.
Uh-oh.
Oh well.
That is a good one, actually. I really like that one. Love Mario Bava.
I've seen that one many years ago. I enjoyed it too.
Yeah, it's
That's one I did have on VHS. I transferred it to DVD for my own private collection, but I do still have it. I think we said it before too. They, you know, when they went from black and white to color, they were really trying to sell people on the color. So that's why the colors in those 60s and early 70s color, you know, they get the vibrant colors to really say, look at this. To really sell the idea.
That's why Star Trek, the uniforms were red, yellow, and blue. They were
Sure, yeah. Bright colors.
Yeah, so that's my third choice.
Sci-fi horror. I do like when they blend those fairly well.
Yeah,
that does blend it really well. All right, so I'm up.
Yeah.
Okay, so my third one. Speaking of Europe, we're going back to Europe. For the first of my two dark comedies, and they don't get much darker for a comedy than this. In fact, you're probably about halfway through the movie before you realize this is actually comedy. Andy Warhol's Dracula, also known as Blood for Dracula, 1974. There were two Andy Warhol movies. He really didn't have anything to do with the movies. I think it was Paul Morrissey directed both of them, or something like that. It is better than Flesh for Frankenstein, the other sister movie that came along with it. Far better. The plot is hilarious. So this family, this guy, father of three daughters, and they need money. You know, they are aristocracy. They need money. Dracula comes knocking at the door saying he's looking for a bride. Marry off one of my women, right? You know, one of my daughters. This is how you did it back then, right? It was, you know, it's period setting, 1800, something like that. But here's the catch. For Dracula in this movie, he can only drink the blood of virgins. And of course, the three daughters tell their father, of course we're virgins. So Dracula starts biting the daughters and getting violently ill because they are not virgins. It's hilarious. And then they think he has TB and he's going to die. And they're like, great, he'll die and we'll get his money, but we got to marry him first. One of these girls.
Right.
So it just keeps getting funnier as it goes, but it plays it straight though. It doesn't play it as a comedy, which I kind of like that better in dark comedy. I really like it when they just, you know, play it as straight as you can, but it's actually, you know, it's just hilarious. I find it hilarious, but I have a weird sense of humor for that kind of thing. So maybe it's just me.
So
now,
wasn't
that one in the Flesh very gory? I mean, like
Flesh for Frankenstein is gorier. This one is still a little bit gory too, though. Yes.
Yeah.
They're both pretty gory.
But so they literally say tuberculosis. They think he has.
Yeah. They said they were assuming he had tuberculosis.
Which is kind of interesting because so many of the old vampire stories that you hear about, when you track them back, they literally were tuberculosis.
Yeah, maybe they were making a connection there, actually.
Again, vampire geek. I've researched a lot of this stuff.
Right. But yeah, they did specifically say TB.
That's interesting. I wonder if they looked into a lot of that lore and decided, yeah, this is what a lot of real the stories that reported as vampirism were, and so they were like, well, that's what they would think it is.
Wouldn't be a bit surprised. It was, you know, I mean, even go back to that 1931 when they finally put the stake in Dracula's heart. He lets out this big, and that was actually part of the lore too. That's when they thought somebody was a vampire, but modern times, modern technology, we know that the reason it would actually do that was it was releasing a lot of the air in the lungs when the stake went through the heart, you know.
Exactly.
Puncture a lung, and it would make them make that sound. It wasn't that they were actually still alive and dying.
Yeah.
But so it is kind of neat too. You make a good point that when you interweave some of that old folklore into some of these movies,
Right.
adds a little extra touch to it.
Yeah, and a little bit of relevance and a little bit of credibility, I guess.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so for my next one, I'm going to go for the remake of Fright Night. And I know, the original Fright Night, everybody is so crazy about that movie that when the remake came out, people just hated it. And I think a lot of the reason they hated it was they hated the fact that it was being redone. But I love the original, but I think I actually like the remake better because it's scarier. It's more serious. The original was almost I don't want to say it's a made for kids, but it's like a young adult version. And the remake was a lot more grown up. And I love the fact that there was a cameo from Chris Sarandon, who was the vampire in the first movie. There's a short cameo of him getting killed by the vampire because he tries to help in the remake. And I don't know. And of course, I'm a David Tennant fanatic, and David Tennant is the version of Peter Vincent in this movie, which is very different from the Peter Vincent of Roddy McDowell. But I don't know. I just think in a lot of ways, I think it's a better movie. Um, and people hated on it because, again, I think because they had so much attachment to the original.
Right. I think of them
Yeah,
almost
the
like two
remake,
different kinds of movies.
Yeah, they're very much different kinds of movies.
If you want something a little funny, you go for the original. If you want some little more serious and dark, you go for the remake.
Yep.
I think I saw that one in the theater. Yeah, that
I did not see it in the theater, but I remember I saw it on streaming, on one of the streaming things, and then I went and I bought the Blu-ray because I was like, oh, I love this movie. So that's my choice for fourth one.
all right. I'm gonna probably do a 1-2 punch here. Um, a box set with the two Count Yorga films. Um, this is one with Count Yorga is played by an actor named Robert Quarry, and this was done on American International Pictures. Again, I saw these late night. I think when I saw all those kind of horror movies late night, it was on a program that was before Elvira came onto the scene, and I think it was this drunk vampire named Seymour, and he had like a green face and everything. But this one starts off with with a séance, and it for me this one is for that American International Pictures for a low budget vampire movie. It was really good, and it wasn't until recently that I saw the sequel. But this one here, I mean, I don't particularly like this artwork. It's not the best on the Blu-ray, but I think it probably has one of those. It has that reversible thing, and it has these really cool cars in it. Let's see if I can get that. They're just little like what is it? Those lobby cards, just reproductions of them. That's the one thing I noticed with Arrow is they kind of go all out with what they do, and it's like in some waves. You know how we had the Dracula films because of that the two of them. This one kind of is like a little bit kind of like a mirror version of those. But I mean I really like this, and then the sequel. This came out, the first one in 1970, and then the second one 71. I don't know if they were ever going to do a third or not because, you know, here's the second one, The Return of Count Yorga. And interesting enough, I was just reading the origin of the film. The film was originally supposed to be a softcore porn called the Loves of Camp Yorga, and then I guess they just changed that idea out. You know, it wasn't, I guess, going through how they wanted it, and then they just said
the lead actor wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Way. Yeah, he refused to do it that way. He wanted it changed.
Yeah, so it's like I'm kind of glad. I'm kind of glad because it's they're both really strong stories. Kind of more modern vampire lore than anything, you know. And then the box set comes with this really cool little booklet. Aside from those lobby cards, it comes with this little booklet. I love this.
Yeah, it looks pretty cool.
That would make a great T-shirt. And it's got all the studio notes in here. If you like these movies, this is something. I had just had these ones on regular Blu-rays, and then when I found out Arrow was bringing it out, I got rid of those and said, well, I'm getting these. You know, I normally don't like to double dip, but this one was one of those few movies, that, the series, that I would definitely double dip on. And I just recently got this like about sometime last year, and looks great on Arrow. You know, they always do a great job. So that's going to be my fourth and fifth one. So I'm going to leave it up to you guys to finish up the show.
Okay, that is a good one though. It's been a little while since I've seen it, but I do remember they really captured the atmosphere pretty well.
Yeah.
Which I'm always about the atmosphere.
I liked.
Yeah, the seance.
Yeah, I liked how they took the aristocratic sort of vampire thing and then they brought it into more of a modern time period, which was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that was again, you know, watching that late night, it was like, oh my God, that was.
And there were some elements where it was like people were trying to challenge him, and they brought in the whole, look, I've lived so much longer than you. I'm so much more powerful, so much smarter than you. You really think you can defeat me? Which, you know, that really is a nice piece of vampire lore too.
Oh yeah.
It is.
kind
of narcissist a little bit, yes. You know.
But again, if you've literally lived that much longer, you would have acquired that much more wisdom and intelligence, and you know how things work. So you would be a lot harder to defeat.
Oh yeah.
It's a good point. For a man who's only lived one lifetime, you are very wise, Van Helsing. I'm back to Bela Lugosi. But anyway. All right, so my last one, Classic Camp, is stepping into the modern days, sort of. Renfield, that came out last year. That's a fun comedy horror version of this. The movie opens with a shot-for-shot remake of the 1931 original. Not the full movie, obviously, but several key scenes with Renfield at the castle and everything. And they did really well at that alone, with black and white and everything. And Nicolas Cage plays Dracula. And I'm not the biggest Nicolas Cage fan in the world, but he knocks it out of the park in this one. I mean, I can't say anything. Every once in a while, he does something that's like, wow, actually, maybe he is pretty good. And this was one of them, I thought. The plot of this one is that Renfield and Dracula kind of have this codependent relationship. And Renfield seeks therapy and other ways. He's trying to get out of that relationship. They've moved to America because he needs fresh blood once again. And Renfield has decided maybe it's finally time for me to move on and get out of this codependent relationship. But of course, Dracula doesn't want him to do that. So there becomes some friction there. But they do make it into a comedy, and it works fairly well. Of course, I have that weird sense of humor. but I thought it was really well done. And I don't say that about too many modern movies. I'm the classic guy, but this one I thought was definitely worth catching. I'm trying to branch out. Give me some into more modern movies as well. But this one caught my eye, and I thought it was well done all the way around.
I've been wanting to see that one, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, me too.
I do. I wouldn't say I'm a Nicolas Cage fanatic, but I do like Nicolas Cage. I can't say I've ever seen a movie with him in it that I didn't like. And the trailers I've seen for that look like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's on Tubi, and I'm one of those people, I really actually dislike Nicolas Cage, but I do like him. Every once in a while he does do something that I think, well, that was actually really good. And this would be one of them. He's not a huge role in this one, somewhat minor but prominent. But
obviously Renfield has the title, so
yeah.
Right.
But they also follow a lot of the Dracula folklore. One scene that stands out that I really died in the theater was, Dracula's not supposed to enter anyone's home until he's invited in. And when Renfield comes home from work one day, Dracula's in his apartment, and he's like, how do you get there? And he looks down, and the welcome mat says "welcome" on his door mat. It's like, he's like, oh,
I love that.
Yeah, it was, there's little things like that if you're really, really cult things, and if you're really a vampire fan, nobody else is really going to catch in the theater. But there's a lot of things like that throughout the whole movie. It is a lot of fun. It's very enjoyable.
Awesome.
And a little gory, but
You gotta have gore in good vampire movies.
Gotta have to. I mean, he's drinking blood. You gotta have blood in there.
Yeah. All right, so I guess it's my last one, and we'll go with the gore here. I want to go with 30 Days of Night, which was actually originally a comic book, and I've not read the comic book, but I should. All right, so the premise is this. There's a place in Alaska. It was Barrow then. It has a name that I can't pronounce now because they went back to the Native American name for it. But in the comic book and in the movie, they say that they have 30 days where the sun goes down and doesn't come up. It's actually something more like 56 days or something when the sun doesn't come up. But these vampires decide, hey, this is a perfect time for us to show up here and just, feast. And the vampires are not your typical vampires. They're much less glamorous. They're much more brutal, and they're just, they're just like really, really frightening vampires. Probably the most frightening vampires I've seen in any movie. They're just brutal. And they start terrorizing this town because it never becomes daylight. So they've got lots of time. And they play games with them and, sort of lure people out and stuff. And I just think, the ending, you could argue about the ending. The ending's a little comic booky because it came from a comic book, but it's, I just think it's a really, really good movie. It's dark, it's frightening, and it's just a lot of fun.
I remember seeing that one. Yeah, that was a pretty frightening and brutal. That's one area of the world you don't want to be in, and all of a sudden vampires come to town.
Exactly.
Especially if you go even further north, you got 6 months
Yeah.
of total darkness. And it's like, oh, 6 months? Well, bye-bye.
Although as few people as would live up there, those vampires would starve to death.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, most definitely. Yeah, that was a good one. All right, well, did another one. Went well, I think.
Yeah.
We didn't have any duplicates, which is always good because it just makes it easier for the viewer to go and check out all these movies, you
I got
know.
movies to check out now.
Oh yeah, going all the way back to the 30s up into last year or so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of years to go by.
A lot of good
But,
ones. A lot of good
yeah,
ones.
well,
That
yeah,
last one of Gary's kind of sounded like The Last Man on Earth, which was to take on I Am Legend. It was
yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of like the brutal, almost
Certain
zombie-like vampires.
Yeah. Oh, you if you've not seen that movie, you have to see it. It's like they're sort of dressed like the traditional vampires, and they're like, they never really make it clear where they're from, but you get the feeling it's someplace Eastern European, but it's not. I mean, they've got a little bit of an accent. No, in fact, they speak in another language, and it's translated. And they're just, I mean, the head vampire, they're just brutal. I mean, and he's very clear about when you kill someone, you decapitate them so that they don't come back as another vampire because we don't need more mouths to feed, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the most brutal vampire movies I think I've ever seen. They did some sequels. I saw the first sequel and it wasn't as good, but
Wow. All right. Well, I want to thank you guys again. You know,
thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Been a lot of fun as usual, and we'll be back in March, and we're going to be doing some zombies.
Is that what we're doing?
I thought it was. Yeah. So, stay tuned for that, and many more topics to come. So, I'll talk with you guys soon. Thank you very much for watching this episode. And stay tuned for the next one.